Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So welcome to another episode of the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And today I am here with Anna Strickland, who is an empowerment coach, a photographer, a circus expert, who has a really strong focus on social justice in her work. And a lot of the work she does is to find creative solutions to help people reclaim their bodies, their energy, and their time. She goes under the photography name HeardinLondon, and she's also a coach and has her self-care school that you can tell me more about that, Anna, as well, where she is offering courses, I think it's self-study courses, right? And also there's a community element to that. She has a podcast, and I'm also learning that she is a community organizer for survivors of gendered abuse with an organization called True You, where she combines her passion for creative solutions with a drive for radical intersectional solution at the core. And there's lots more we can talk about, and I'm going to give you some space, Anna, to talk about your story and the work that you do. But what I'm hoping that we're going to focus our conversation on today is to really talk about the intersection around body image, photography, and I suppose, would you say that brings in like self-objectification, you know, the relationship we have, not just with our bodies, but also with the image of our bodies through photography. But anyway, Anna, thank you so much for being here, and I'm so looking forward to have this conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me, Lynn. I love the fact that you make my CV sound like a bit of a casserole, because that's what it feels like sometimes. Just everything all in at once, but it's all focused in the same direction of trying to help people feel more comfortable in their own skin and more at home in their own bodies. Because I think if we spent some more time working out ways to feel safe with ourselves, then we have so much more power and energy and time for some of the more important things in life than what we look like.
I agree. And I think actually what you just said there, maybe I need to sort of nick that into my own little bio, because I feel like a lot of the work that I do is also centered around that. Because when we feel better in, like you said, in our bodies and safer within ourselves, and you know, food and eating and obsessions around weight and stuff is kind of, you know, petered out, there's so much more space for things that we maybe really care about that can come to the forefront.
And it isn't to dismiss the fact that it is a very real problem for so many people, but I think it is intentionally distracting. I think there is an awful lot of power that we all have to harness that we could do to change an awful lot. But many, many of us are distracted by things like cellulite when we could be doing things like bringing down the patriarchy. You know, I believe it's very intentional, but you know, that's what happens when you invite a militant feminist onto your podcast, Lynn. So
I am so excited. And I agree. I think, you know, some years ago I read, you know, the seminal work of Naomi Wolf, beauty
myth.
the beauty myth, yeah, which is a pretty big tombstone. It took me months because the writing is very academic and I'm not so used to reading that. But I still keep, and I keep sharing this with people, like one of the biggest things that I took away that sort of still sticks from all the work she had in that was exactly what you're talking about, the intentionality of keeping us stuck as women, that the more freedom we got over time with voting rights and being able to go out in the workplace, and join the workforce and have just decisions whether we want to start a family or not, and you know, reproductive rights, all of those. Every time there's like a backlash in the culture coming back to find something else for us to focus on. So when we weren't chained to the stove, then we became chained to the scales, and now I think it's sort of morphing again, and it's the same underpinnings, but it just looks different.
And I think as a photographer, I find that incredibly interesting, especially as we are at a very interesting point, or maybe in the sort of second generation of an interesting point, I think, where people initially, I wondered whether the advent of people taking a lot of selfies of themselves could actually be quite empowering, of reclaiming their own faces and reclaiming the way that they looked and felt about their bodies. But that very quickly turned into, and then I'm going to put a filter on top of it, and I'm going to make myself look different to how I look. And ironically, we created this sort of culture of trolling ourselves. So I think quite often people can slap these filters on, or these, slightly smooth skin smoothing, or slightly making people slighter or smaller, or quite often making their skin lighter. Filters that we put on everything. And then 2 weeks later, you look at that picture and think, oh my God, I've gone to seed in the last 2 weeks, and you didn't look like that in the first place. And you're telling yourself that it's a problem that you don't look like that now. And I think that it's a very sly trick that is happening at the moment. And I think we need to be very mindful of it. And I'm sort of interested in the next phase of how this will be projected onto ourselves with the advent of AI technology, and how easy it will become to be able to morph ourselves into the vision of what we think we should look like, which is quite often going to be quite different to what we see in the mirror, and how much potential there is for bullying yourself in the disparity between those two images, I think is going to be a very fragile point that we need to take a lot of care of ourselves, and a lot of care of our friends, and just people around us noticing what is happening and how they're playing with and manipulating their own images and their own self-opinion. Because I think that it could be a very dangerous point for a lot of people who may feel like they've done a lot of healing and done a lot of work and have progressed through a lot of things, and suddenly there's quite a big new weapon that could be used to really harm ourselves with, I think.
I think, there's part of me who thinks that's already happening. And the like when I was growing up, there was like, we didn't have the social media, and you weren't taking the amount of pictures that you're taking now, like with our phones, and then there wasn't and of course there wasn't the filters. But like, I can still find myself looking in the mirror and not being entirely sure what I look like, or how I perceive whether it's my face or my body. It depends on what else is going on, maybe in my life, or how my clothes are fitting, or the time of the month, or other things. So there is already distortion happening, right, without any of these filters. And then when we add the filters on, it feels like it's like a meta distortion, because what we're looking at, even if I'm taking a picture of my face, the camera lens angle, it might make me look different to what I see in the mirror. So it's like it's already a bit messed up, and now we're like layering on these filters that can entirely change entirely what our face looks like or what our body looks like. And then now there's another level of distortion there. And I think what you're saying, we really need to take good care of ourselves to realize what we see is only a mirage. It's like it's an illusion. It doesn't exist.
And that's maybe as the AI versions or the face filters, the sort of another layer of just reminding. We could use it in a positive way of just reminding ourselves that it is actually, we're making all of this up. We have filters on in our brain, but this filter we can actually see.
Yeah.
I personally feel, I don't know about you, but I feel like perhaps every sort of 5 or 7 years, I'll catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and be like, oh God, that's what I look like now. I sort of had this story about what I look like, but it sort of updates, but it updates with like really big jagged intermissions, going, oh, that's my face. It isn't this thing that I'm sort of projecting
Yeah.
on there. And it's, of course we do that in every other area of our lives, right? It's just quite interesting to watch with something you're as familiar with as your face.
I know, and that also makes me think it, like when you do, say if you get a very different haircut, or you color your hair, or even I stopped coloring my hair, I think it was in 2021. Yeah, I stopped. And even though that was a very gradual process of growing it out, I was surprised how long it took for me to get used to seeing my face in the mirror in a different way with a different hair color. And it was almost like it wasn't until there was enough photographs of me like on my social media feed or stuff that I could look at also that showed this new version of myself with my gray hair or graying hair that I was like, okay, that is what I look like. It was weird. Like, I just think, you
So
know,
you need to have evidence of yourself out there in the world to exist.
yeah. I mean, like saying that out loud feels a bit like, what's with that?
Well,
But,
look, as a
you know,
photographer, that's what I mean, that's literally what I do for a living. I think, my aim of, as you sort of touched on in the intro, that a lot of the work that I do is with survivors of gendered abuse. Have sort of quite close links with domestic violence and sexual abuse services who refer people to me who have body image issues. And I think especially if you have a history of your body being weaponized, your self-opinion can be very tied up in some of your history. And what I try and do is provide people with an alternative view to what they're telling themselves in the mirror. And it is I think a whole load of the mission of the work that I do is to be able to give people something tangible in their hands that when on their worst day, when they're, talking to themselves in the mirror in a really unkind way, that they can look at these pictures and go, this isn't the only view. And it doesn't mean that my view is right or the photographs that I've taken are right, but just to interrupt that pattern of the fact that what you're telling yourself is the truth. And I think just adding in that potential of curiosity and opening up to the idea that many things could also be true gives some space that provides an intermediary step rather than I'm being really horrible to myself in the mirror, but I should love myself. And now I'm going to give myself an extra hard time for the fact that I don't love myself. That seems to be the sort of polar, social media version of self-care that I see a lot of, I'm old enough to remember the sort of Louise Hay version of you should just look in the mirror and tell yourself you love yourself 1,000 times. And it's like, cool, but I don't. So now I feel like I'm looking in the mirror and telling myself a lie, and that doesn't feel nice either. So what are the intermediary steps? And I
yeah.
do a lot of sort of processing of photographs with people in terms of how they view the images they have of themselves, of just trying to tone it down a little bit from you don't have to look at this image and think that, you're the most gorgeous, sexy, alluring goddess, non-binary S, non-binary, I don't know what they're called as our neutral term for um but just you don't have to have these high expectations of yourselves, but can you at least humanize it? Are you at
Yeah.
least like actively practicing? And one of the biggest breakthroughs of work that I did on myself for my own body image stuff was just whenever I caught myself being horrible to myself in the mirror, of like adding on the suffix of that's a human stomach, or those are human thighs, or just taking it down to the anatomy body parts. The amount of people that talk to me about how they're ashamed of their belly, and I quite often interrupt people with like, do you realize how weird it would be if you just had a gap there? I think what you have is like a really good starting place. Let's see if we can, give some love to the digestive functions that it might be operating right now. Like, I
Yeah.
just think providing some kind of humanization of it gives us an access point to be able to start like turning down the cruelty a little bit.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. Like you know, I don't know if I actually been thinking about naming it in that sense, but that's that's really like what if we're trying to do that because the opposite is like this objectification, and we're seeing ourselves as an object, not as a part of who we are. And it's like we just see all these flaws, and it's almost like we're looking at this ornament but we're all like living, breathing beings.
And I think
And
it's that overallness is really crucial for me, especially when I'm talking. I give people quite a lot of coaching on how to look at their photographs after the shoot. And what I think we find quite easy to do, and many of us fall into the habit of, is honing in on the parts of ourselves that we view to be faults and focusing only on that part. And what I really encourage people to do is to start getting into the practice of looking at the whole of the body as a whole piece, rather than that chin, that nose, that earlobe, or whatever it is you happen to have a hang up about. Like, can you just go through your photographs, and people who are listening can start this as a practice at home? Can you go through some photographs and see a whole human body? And just practice that so it starts getting that to be accessible in your brain as a possibility of a way to look at another human. And then can you go back through them and look at it from the view of the way that one of your friends would look at you? I think one of the things that we were talking about, some of the you sent through some questions before we started the interview, and one of the things that you asked me about was how I got into this work originally. And I think that for me, and I think that this is probably quite a common thing that people come across. Sadly for me, my mum died 15 years ago. And when I was trying to prepare for her funeral, my mum lived in a larger body. I've got all of her genes, and she spent 90% of the time that anyone had a camera out, she'd be putting her hand up to the camera or pulling a funny face or telling them that she didn't want a photograph of herself. And so when I was preparing for her funeral, I don't have any photographs of my mum. Like, the patriarchy and body image stole my mum from me. I don't have any photographs of my mum where she is not horrified at her own body. And what a devastating thing to do to your child, which is by no means her fault. It's very much systematic. But know that these responses that we are having to our own face, what we're actually doing is stealing memories from our ancestors. And that's quite a big, important thing that we're doing. It's huge.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And hearing that story from you really puts it in perspective what it means to remove yourself out of the picture. It means that there is no traces left, visual traces left of you then for other people to remember and to celebrate and to look at. And
I have
yeah.
no images of my mum laughing or smiling or being silly or fun, or, they are all criticizing her own body. And, I think that so many of us are in the habit of trying to put ourselves forward as the most beautiful, most sexy, most pouty. Like, even if we could just look at annihilating the word flattering, if we hone in on that word flattering, what does that mean? That means I want this image to make me look as slight as possible. I want there to be as little of me as possible in this image. And if you look through that from a socialized patriarchal lens of what that's saying about women's worth and their ability to take up space, it's quite disgusting that we've fallen for this.
Yeah. And most of the time, we aren't even aware, because I feel as well, and I had this conversation with somebody else, I feel recently, in the sense of, with the body image, like when we're in it, it feels like it's a me problem, and I'm the one that has a problem, or I'm the one, or my body is a problem. And it's like kind of a very little awareness of where these ideas and thoughts come from in the first place, until maybe that's also like a part of getting older, but like understanding that, wait a second, where did I learn this? And I don't have to think this way. And we can put that blame back on the culture where it belongs, instead of having it internalized.
Something that a thought that I use quite heavily in my coaching sessions when I'm working on body image with people is, who's making money out of you feeling like that?
Yeah.
And it cuts the core very quickly. But I think that people who are interested in this and are interested in the importance of more of us feeling welcome in the world and more of us feeling safe in the world, it's very important to do the research. It really doesn't take very long to have a little roam around on a search engine to find out the racist colonial history of BMI, or the segregation of why smaller, slighter bodies are given more value and worth in our culture. And I think it is a conversation which is beginning but hasn't been opened up enough personally. As you know from my social media, is a very big bugbear of mine, but I think that as the criticism of fat bodies and larger bodies is so based on internalized ableism and, sometimes external ableism, and the criticism that we have of other people's bodies only being allowed to be a certain way in order to be acceptable and worthy of love, or worthy of societal value. I think there is a huge amount of ableism. As someone who I've always been fat. I've been fat since I was a kid, but I used to be exceedingly active, and people used to really frequently say to me, "Oh, as long as you're healthy." Well, now I'm not. So where do you put that now? Now it is
Mhm.
just I'm fat, and people will very much consider fat bodies to be public property. So I think you've probably seen quite a lot over the last week or so. Like I've started documenting all the times that random strangers come up and just tell me about my body. And it is very much a reflection of society's ills of the way that we treat, accept, and shun people in any kind of differences. And we have to take responsibility for the fact that when we are criticizing ourselves, we are contributing to that. And we are adding to the fact that we cannot say that we want more people to feel safe and welcome in all the bodies that they have, no matter what ability or what size they are, whilst also like making some joke about the fact that our arms are wobbling a little bit, or maybe our chins are starting to sag. It's a different end of the same continuum, and I
Yeah.
need to start taking more responsibility for the way that we speak to ourselves, because that does reflect in what we accept from other people.
That's a fair point. Yeah, thank you for naming that as well. Because again, I feel that people go, oh, well, I mean, I don't care about what other people do or what other people think about their bodies or but I don't want my body to look like X, or I don't want to gain weight, or I don't want my underarms to be, or the back of my arms, whatever, to be flabby, or any of those things. And like, I think we have to sit with that, like what you said, like the honesty of being really honest with ourselves is like, well,
Why?
the two, yeah,
If it
why? And
isn't, if you wouldn't wish it, like you don't, if you can say, I don't mind what other people do, but I wouldn't want it for me, well, would you want that person's body? And if not, why? Be
yeah,
honest with yourself about that. I
yeah,
think one of the hardest challenges I had when I was doing a lot of my body image work was I realized that actually I didn't want to create peace with my body now. What I worked really hard on is, could I love myself if I was 10 times fatter? That was an epic leap of expanding my heart and my looking at my own internalized prejudices.
yeah, that's a big, and it like, it will bring discomfort, lots of discomfort. I think it's a given. And it's just being able to, like, how much of that discomfort can we tolerate while doing that kind of work.
And it is, discomfort is obvious because that's how we've been socialized. And also, like, prejudice is more uncomfortable. So, how much are you willing to do your own work in order to make the world a more fair and equitable place? And I think that unlearning some of this stuff is so crucial to more people being safe in the world. And if that really is part of our mission, then we really have to take on board the discomfort of looking at some of our own stuff. And it's going to be really challenging when we live in a society that absolutely, well, I mean, it's a billion-dollar industry to tell us, I don't know how much you like swearing on your podcast, Mary, Lynn, but I was talking earlier that I was a sweary Mary. But I think that just the mere idea of the fact that we can be any time where we're not feeling like we are absolute scum is a victory. Like, I
Yeah.
think there are people who make so much money from profiting every minute of every day on telling us that we're a piece of shit. Like, it's just such a prolific industry, from billboards to the filters to social media to television. Any moment that we are feeling like we are anywhere near human, we've won. And so to take those victories along the way and try and build on them rather than thinking that we haven't done enough yet.
Yeah, yeah, you come out with so much wisdom, Anna. It's like, I don't know where to start. I'm just sitting here nodding in agreement. But yes, I suppose it's the thing. And it's always like, it's so incessant that, like, I think even for me, sometimes, like, being fairly aware of all the different points and being quite shielded in many ways, um, it's still like it's a lot, and it's because it is everywhere all the time, it can be quite hard to spot it until you really start looking out for that.
And even for myself, I mean, I have gone through quite a transition in the last couple of years. I've become considerably more disabled in the last couple of years, but I've also started to work on trying to make peace with the fact that if I'm really honest with myself, I would like a smaller body. And I would like a smaller body because I want to be able to live a life where I am not subjected to other people coming up to on the street and telling me how disgusting I am. I want to be able to sit in a chair without having to ask people if there are provisions made for me. I want to be able to go into a shop and buy clothes. And there is a whole load of privileges that are just everyday occurrences that I would just like that pressure off myself. And what I've realized with that is that that is a societal problem rather than a me problem. And something I think if there are people who are listening to this who live in wayward bodies like mine, something that I found a lot of peace in over the last couple of years is really acknowledging what a man-made problem is. And I use the gender term very specifically because militant feminist. But I've realized that actually my body and my size are not a problem in nature. Like I've never gone walking in the woods and had the trees tell me that like my cellulite's a bit rough. Trees love a bit of like, have you seen the texture of their bark? They're glorious.
Mm,
They love a bit of rough and
yes.
tumble. Or like
Yeah.
I've never got in the ocean and the sea's gone like, oh sorry, there's not enough water for you. Like I
Yeah.
think when I'm in nature, I don't feel like I reject myself as much. It's when I'm having to force my body into man-made structures that are for an average, which I am not.
Yeah.
That is when my body becomes a problem. And that's how I know that it's not me.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, so much to take away from just thinking about it in that way, that it's not, yeah, when I know I'm in places where there is ample space for me to be myself and take up the space that's needed, it isn't a problem. Whereas when there's things made for this average, and there's a whole other direction we could go with this conversation around like average and the typical man or woman and clothing and how it's like made for this kind of average person that doesn't really exist. But I'm kind of, I suppose I'm really curious about, and as somebody who's had some professional photographs taken and obviously take some pictures and having to put, trying to put my face out there as part of my marketing, so people get a sense of who you are, even though currently for the podcast recordings, we use audio only, which it's actually just because I have to do a lot of editing and video editing, and I'm not really in the headspace or time space or anything for that. So
People could
it's
watch
not
it, they'd
about,
see
but
there's a lot of nodding going on that you're not hearing.
yeah. But yeah, tell me, because I think, from what I'm gathering, your process of taking professional photographs is quite different to other photographers in the fact that you're offering the processing afterwards, because that was something the first time that I had professional pictures taken about maybe 9 years ago. That when I got them, like it was nerve-wracking to be in front of the lens for a change, but also then when the photographer sent me the photographs, I don't know, I felt so nervous and so actually quite stressed about it because I didn't know how I was going to feel about looking at them. And I can't, I think some of it I was okay with, and some of us kind of, oh, I'm not so sure. And then I recently had pictures done last year, and 7, 8, 9 years ago, whatever, I'd done more work, more understanding, and looking at those. And also the photo shoot itself was quite different because I felt the photographer really got my work and what I'm trying to do. And I did feel that when I looked at some of those, I wasn't as nervous actually to receive them and look at them. And then looking at some of those, I really felt that she captured what I see in the mirror. So I didn't feel like, they didn't look like they look too unfamiliar to my own perception of my own image. So that has been, that was a nice experience, and I feel quite happy to use some of those pictures. But talk to me, like, how, if someone was doing a photo shoot with you, like, what does that process look like?
So first of all, I offer people whether they want a place in a studio or whether they want somewhere out in nature, because I think that initially having those two options is really important for people to be able to feel like they have the freedom to be themselves in their most comfortable environment. Um, and then I offer them a body image coaching session. So we talk about, a lot of people have a lot of trepidation about having pictures taken. I think a lot of people are. I actually do a lot of coaching sessions with people on body image who aren't going to have a photo shoot, and I try and hone in on the, oh, when I've lost weight people, because it's like, how about celebrating your now body? What could we do with that? Could we just look at it a little bit? Maybe we could just, have a look around the edges a little bit of what might be going on for you there. Um, and during the shoot itself, I try and give people a lot of opportunity. Like, there's a huge amount of prep that goes into the shoot itself. So I give people a guide, I give them some questionnaires, I give them some guidance. I encourage them to bring lots of things that they love to the shoot. So it might be lots of different outfits, or it might be some, books or jewelry, or if there's anyone that they really love that they feel like they could bring, I don't know, like maybe some jewelry from their grandmother or something that their best friend got them or something, so they can bring them into the room with them. And I do, for me, there is a huge portion of the shoot, and the importance of the shoot for me is about consent. And so every time quite often what happens, first of all, is people walk into the room and they say, oh, I don't know how to pose, is nearly always their first greeting. And I'm like, well, you're not meant to. I mean, that's a really unhuman thing to be like. And if you do know how to, like, it's quite a weird pastime if that's what you've been spending your adulthood doing in front of the mirror, unless you're a professional model. And it is something that I've studied. That is part of my job. So I wouldn't walk into the Royal Albert Hall and go, I can't play the tuba. This is not it's not meant to be your forte. So I think just walking in, allowing people to be themselves. And what I try and do is to create stories and scenarios for them where I'm talking to them a lot and taking photographs while I'm talking to them. But what's so important for me in every interaction that we have is, if there is a particular thing where I'm trying to look at the light that is on someone's face, or the way that, a particular, maybe like a little bit of clothing's got ruffled or something, every time I can see something that might need adjusting, I will say to them, is it okay if I move your hair here? Or is it okay if I just adjust your hand? And what happens with that interaction is that by the time they leave the studio, there may have been 20 or 200 interactions where I say, may I, about their body, and they know that they have an opportunity to say yes or no. And there are so few opportunities in our adult life, as people who are socialized as women, I feel especially, where you are asked consent about touching your body, and you are able to offer a yes or a no, and you know that it's going to be respected. It's something that we are told that we should just know, but we actually rarely get to practice. And so I feel that almost at the end of the session, even if no one ever saw their photographs, that in itself is such an important, powerful lesson that you've had to reiterate over and over again. Do I want this? Yes or no? And knowing that their response is going to be respected. In the questionnaire beforehand, I make sure that I offer people a safe word. So if they feel at any point they want just a timeout, they don't want to have to explain themselves, they're offered that, so they know that this is a space where they're not going to have to explain themselves. I ask access requirements, pronouns, making sure that the space is as welcoming to as many people as possible in the way that they want to walk into the space. And so I feel really strongly that almost the photographs are a PS at the end of the whole experience. Um, as a photographer, I think if photographers would look at my work, they'd probably weep. Technically, it is not the classic portraits that you would see in many. You've seen my work. It isn't the sort of stand and pout headshot. I'm probably no better at Photoshop than Kate Middleton, frankly. And so I'm going to show people what they're actually giving to me. But my forte, I think probably one of, my best personality traits is that I'm really good at standing in front of someone and thinking that they're the most amazing, incredible human in the entire planet. And so therefore it's really easy for me to click a button and capture that because that's what I'm seeing, like my reverence and respect of other humans. I'm Buddhist, and my respect of the value of life and the important characteristics and the ingredients that we all add to this universe is so prolific that it's really easy for me to just press a button on some expensive aluminium and glass and capture that. Whereas when people are, being really horrible to themselves in the mirror, they've got this strong narrative which is reinforced the whole time, and just disrupting that with something very tangible, I think is so precious, just to be able to go, this is what you could look like when you're looking at yourself with respect. This is what you could look like when you're being looked at with love. And because I think maybe the photographs aren't so staged or aren't so posed. I did a course in a photography course in Italy a few years ago, and the teacher was very much the focal point should be on the eye that is closest to the lens. And I was like, I think my focal point's probably their tonsils. They were, sort of very much like put your hand here and then pout towards the lens. And I was like, Beyonce's running with a plate of pasta. What are you going to do? That's more my style of photography. And so therefore, I think the biggest compliment that I get about my photographs is people, as you say, actually, people quite often saying I can really see myself in that. And I think that anything that really shows that quite often people don't know what they look like when they're just about to belly laugh, or when, that look in their eye that their best mate knows when they're just about to drop a secret or tell some gossip that they shouldn't be saying, or when they're trying to keep a laugh in, or, when they're thinking about something and they haven't quite, like, there's so many, because we have a mirror face that we show to ourselves, there's so many other sides of yourself that I think people are quite surprised to see in themselves. It's a whole journey of witnessing the bits of you that you think that you haven't let out, and that's quite exciting. And so when
Yeah.
I then show the pictures to people, I then offer them the opportunity to go through them together, or to have a coaching session afterwards for any stuff that it's brought up, because we're all socialized um in a world that tells us that we should be probably smaller than we actually are. Notice that it's always smaller. It's not that there is an end goal of small that we should get to. Wherever you are, it
That,
should always be smaller.
yeah, it's never enough. Like you can
Yeah,
never be small enough,
yeah.
Yeah.
So just kind of noticing that stuff and then bringing that back up if people want the opportunity to do that is, it's definitely a whole journey. And then about 6 months later or so, I sort of send them a great big PDF of like, so that confidence, how's that going? Let's have a look at this again, and then sort of give them a whole big workbook of things that they can start working on again to just check in with themselves about that stuff.
Yeah. So it sounds like getting a photo session done with you. It's actually really a body image work, really, Enrique. And I suppose that comes back to what you had in what you have in your bio. It's like reclaiming our bodies through that. I think what you said earlier, like through that visual aspect, that we can do that in ways that are actually helpful versus the objectification that can happen when we're looking at ourselves from the outside in, which of course is typically our only view of our bodies. In that sense, like we become objects just by default, because I can see you because I don't live in your body, but I live in my own. So just to really, I think, see like using photographers as positive and reclaiming all of those parts of ourselves, and changing the internal narrative.
And
Yeah, that sounds
I
like
think
very powerful work.
there's a term from Jessie Neeland. I don't know if you come across Jessie. I can send you
Mm-hmm.
some links to her work otherwise. But she has this concept of a self-objectifier, which I think is really interesting, of looking at how we present ourselves to be safe and desirable. Most of us are, seeking safety from that view. But my work is hopefully to try and provide lots of different angles on the way that you can inhabit your body without having to inhabit it to be chosen or selected.
Yeah, yeah, that's another thing. And what I found actually, during COVID, during the lockdowns, was we don't have a full length mirror in apartment that I live in. And that's probably, I actually haven't had a really full-length mirror anywhere in views for forever. I feel like I had one in my previous house, but it was an inside of a wardrobe, and I would look at that when I try out an outfit and stuff. But I don't really have that. So because of all the Zoom calls and everything that happened to those, until I learned that you could actually turn off the self view on Zoom calls, which was, oh my God, that's amazing, because you don't, because that was another distraction of like constantly
We're
seeing
not used to
yourself.
seeing this much of ourselves by any means.
No, like the only people who would do that is hairdressers. They're the only ones that would see themselves mirrored back all day, every day, because they're in front of a mirror putting hair. But I remember then catching myself, like my full body, in a glimpse of like shop front windows and stuff. And it was a bit kind of like, I suppose, distorting in a way, because I was so used to inhabit my body from the inside out instead of seeing constant reflection. So I was a bit like, oh, is that what my body looked like? And because we were at home all the time, so the clothes you were wearing were more or less the same day in, day out, with yoga pants and what, a sweater or a woolly jumper or something like that. And then it was like, oh, right. Oh, I have a body that comes from the shoulders down, because I wasn't seeing that visually represented. But of course, I was inhabiting it. And for me, part of my own, I think, journey, it's been, the more I can be in living in my body from the inside out, the more sort of grounded and the less concerned I personally feel about what my body looks like on the outside to other people. And the more, I suppose, the more comfortable then I feel. It's like, well, if I feel comfortable on the inside, I care less about what other people think about the outside.
And that's just about creating a sense of safety, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
whichever way round it goes, the more that we can find those little anchors and hooks to help us feel more safe in ourselves, the less easy it is to be destabilized by other people's opinions of us.
yeah,
The analogy that I quite often use in coaching sessions is, if someone comes up to me and says, the reason that you're single is because you're fat, I would be quite hurt and offended by that. Whereas if someone were to come up to me and say the reason that you're single is because you're too tall, I'd be like, weird. Okay.
yeah.
Like it just doesn't have any hook for me at all. And I think, we can just notice these things in ourselves about the way that we are presuming other people or to be rejecting us, I guess is the simplest way to put it, of like, where is that showing a little highlighter ring around some work on ourselves where we could do with probably giving ourselves a bit more love than we are doing.
I agree. Yeah, I think so. And I think as well, it feels like, particularly with the filters and everything, and I know I'm sort of slightly changing tack, but like with this conversation, having it with younger people that are very vulnerable, like, I'm thinking about teenagers from early teens into your early 20s, and now we have this layer, the second layer of distortion with being able to filtering our photos and videos and stuff. And having the conversation, because I feel like even when I know myself, like I know that's, like I put a filter on a photograph. I mean, cognitively, I know it's filtered, but it's almost like our brains are not able to, like, they just take the information as facts, even when we know it's not. And
Well,
it's
it's
sort of, it feels
also
like it,
because Well, it's
yeah,
also because you are, by putting the filter on, there is a bit of your brain that knows that you put it on because you think that looks nicer. So there is a part of your brain that is like, okay, so real me is rejected.
mm,
Like
yeah,
you can't lie to yourself. You can't trick yourself out of that. Like your brain just watched you do it. So you can't,
yeah,
and so of course that stuff is going to be picked up on. But also we have, the capacity within our brain for the thing that we see most of is what we become more attracted to. We find it more familiar, we find it more safe. And that is just old, cave people genetics going on there. So it just the same as, when you have to go shoe shopping but feel a bit resentful about the fact that you absolutely have to buy this particular type of shoes, you start looking at other people's feet a lot more. That kind of, when we start mirroring what's going on around us, like of course our brain accepts what we see as the truth, but it's also there's that residue of, oh, but real me isn't good enough, I have to
yeah.
change it.
And then it feels like then if we're looking at constantly looking at filtered images of ourselves. Now what we see in the mirror, of course, is just doesn't match. And then that means that what we're currently seeing in the mirror, which we maybe didn't really like before, we like even less because we
We're,
got used to looking at this other thing.
we're trolling ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good term. But I feel like there cannot be enough conversations around that. Like I was going to say for young people, but I think across the board, ongoing, like, and sort of go, don't do it.
All of the young people are going to make all of the mistakes that we should think we shouldn't, and like, that is their prerogative, right? For us to be able to watch them do that. And I think what we need to do is to make sure that we are doing the work on ourselves so that we are a safe enough space so that when they fall or they hit the bottom, that we are safe, reliable, responsible, ethical people to be catching them. And if
Hmm,
we are giving ourselves a brutal time of it, why would they come to us for any kind of understanding as to what they're going through? And I think that's why it's so important to do our own personal work. It's so
true.
interesting what you were saying about the filters and the view in the mirror, because something that I've been noticing lately of just the absolute mind-bendingness of some of the very realistic AI image generation now. And as a photographer, quite often I play the game of can I spot when something is AI generated or not? There's a few social media accounts I spot that play that game. And one of the things that I've been really noticing is that one of the ways to tell that an image is AI generated is whether it has pores on their skin or not, because a lot of people's genuine photographs of themselves, they then slap a filter on top and they airbrush their skin out to look really smooth. And so it looks really unrealistic. Whereas if the skin looks really realistic, it's likely to be generated to look realistic, which is completely mind-bending.
Wow, that's so interesting. I had somebody shared in a forum that I'm in that she had some just to save money, or just to, for the hassle, she wanted some professional looking photos for her LinkedIn profile, and she paid whatever X amount to get them AI generated ones. So she obviously gave them an image. Just this woman in, I think she's in her maybe late 40s or around that age, and she shared the pictures that came back. And I mean, it kind of, you could see it was her, but that's probably they were kind of like what she looked like when she was maybe 22. And that was so interesting too, because it's like, well, who's feeding these algorithms to create something that
And I
makes you
think
look 20 years younger?
I've been looking at a lot of this AI stuff, and I think the AI generation is absolutely replicating the societal prejudices. And the more that you generate something, the lighter the skin becomes, the thinner the people get, the more buxom the ladies get, and slowly their clothes start to fall off. I mean, it is just like it's like a reversal of history in 5 easy clicks. And I think that it's very important. I like from a business point of view, obviously a lot of the AI stuff terrifies me, but from a ethical societal point of view, I think people are obviously entitled to make whatever decisions they want, but I really wish and hope we can have more conversations about people knowingly making decisions about who they're feeding their face to and what they're signing off their face for. So there is no way that your friend, in that group's putting her face in will not now be training other things. And her face could well end up on a billboard poster without any consent from herself. And she may have ticked, we're in very, very murky waters in terms of what we are allowing our likeness to be represented by, and what we don't know where this technology is going and how rapidly it's moving. As a photographer, I would advise a huge amount of caution to allowing your face to be on anything, even if it just looks like it's a cute headshot for a fiver, or it's something on Facebook that's like, what would you look like if you're a lumberjack? Just have like a couple of seconds of would I like my face on a billboard advertising Donald Trump? Because if not, you could have just signed up for that if.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point as well, I think. So, Anna, I mean, I'm sure we could be talking for hours, and probably will have you back at some point
Joyfully.
again, I think. Yes, joyfully. And as you know, my podcast is called Joyful Nourishment. And this is because I feel like that when we're struggling around food eating, body image, it doesn't feel joyful. And I like to ask my guests then what joyful nourishment means to them and how do you joyfully nourish yourself?
I find that chanting is really good for me. I think probably more purist Buddhists would give you some philosophical reason why that is, but I think it's meditation for people who can't shut up. And that just seems to work very well for me, of like, I don't necessarily need to go inwards. I actually need to be putting something out there and connecting with myself. And it just quietens my brain a little bit, and allows me to listen to myself a little louder. I find that is hugely nourishing. I find being in water or near big bodies of water incredibly nourishing, whether that is swimming or looking at a river or, having a hot shower. Or like, I find water incredibly nourishing. And I have a exceptionally prolific habit for Indian street food, which I'm very proud of as well, which is I think I worked in Nepal on and off for 7 years, and there's a lot of Nepali street food, Indian crossover, which I enjoy making a lot of sort of nibbly snacks of things that are incredible. There are dishes, like for those who are listening and know it, or if not, go and find it, is pani puri, which is like a whole story in a dish. You don't really know what's going on in your mouth, but there's layers of depths of ancestors that you can taste in there, which is just delicious. So I like variety. I like variety in my food and in my life.
Yeah, now you have my curiosity piqued. I'll have to go and check that out.
Amazing.
So where can people find out more about your work and follow you and check out your self-care school and your podcast? And I will link to all of those in the show notes as well.
Thank you. If you want to see some of the brilliant humans that I take photographs of, it's over at HeardinLondon. So that's the website, Instagram, Twitter, because I refuse to call it the other name. Anything that you want is HeardinLondon generally. I think Facebook is HeardinLondon Photography. My podcast, my aim is to try and keep my podcast episodes under 5 minutes each episode. Is Spam Filter for Your Brain. And Self-Care School is the place that I do all of the coaching. So you've got the body image courses over there. If you head to selfcareschool.co.uk, or to HeardinLondon.com, you will be able to get access to a free body image workbook that I've got, and maybe I could actually send you the link directly, Lynn, so possibly we could pop that.
Great. Yeah.
And so if anyone wants to just sort of delve a little bit into that, and of course if anyone is in the UK and fancies having a photo shoot or traveling to the UK specifically to have a photo shoot, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, why not? So thanks again, Anna. I mean, I think the work that you put out in the world is radical and very, very much needed. So thank you so much
for inviting me. What a joy it's been to gossip, and hard to pin down to an hour.
Very hard.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.